The story of the Crusades begins in an age of faith, when kings knelt before priests and entire nations bowed to the will of the Church. Across medieval Europe, the power of religion was absolute, and the Holy Land, the place where Christ had lived and died, was seen as the center of the world. Yet that sacred land was no longer in Christian hands, and the news of its loss sent tremors through the heart of Christendom. In the year 1095, a great council was held in the town of Clermont in France. Here, Pope Urban II addressed a vast crowd of nobles, knights, monks, and commoners who had gathered to hear him speak. The Pope's voice carried across the square, filled with righteous fury and divine passion. He spoke of Christian brothers suffering under foreign rule, of holy places defiled by unbelievers, and of God's will that the faithful should rise and reclaim what was lost. He promised that those who took up the cross would be forgiven of all sins and granted eternal salvation. To a population burdened by sin, hunger, and endless war, this call was more than a command. It was a chance at redemption. As the Pope raised his hand, the crowd erupted in cries of "God wills it." Men tore strips of cloth and fashioned crosses upon their chests. From that moment, the crusading movement was born. Across Europe, word spread like wildfire. Lords sold their lands, peasants abandoned their fields. Monks preached in the streets, and blacksmiths toiled night and day to forge weapons and armor. Families wept as fathers and sons marched eastward, bound by faith and fire. This was not one army, but many a vast wave of humanity that rolled toward the unknown. The journey was brutal. Starvation, disease, and desertion struck early. The so-called People's Crusade, a mass of poor pilgrims who set out before the main armies, was slaughtered in Asia Minor. Yet the surviving knights pressed on under banners of the cross, their spirits hardened by suffering. After years of hardship, they reached the walls of Jerusalem. In the summer of 1099, the city stood proud and defiant, surrounded by its ancient stone defenses. For weeks, the Crusaders endured thirst, hunger, and heat as they built siege towers and battering rams. Every night they prayed under the open sky, believing that God watched from above. When the final assault began, the noise of battle shook the earth. Arrows filled the air, siege towers rolled forward, and the walls were set aflame. After days of relentless fighting, the Crusaders broke through. What followed was horror. Streets ran with blood as thousands were slain in the name of God. The conquerors fell to their knees before the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, singing hymns of victory. To them, this was not cruelty, but divine justice. Jerusalem was now a Christian city once more, and the Crusaders established new states across the Holy Land, carved out from the territories they had seized. But triumph was fleeting. The Crusader kingdoms were fragile outposts surrounded by powerful enemies. Their survival depended on reinforcements from Europe, yet distance and disunity made that impossible to sustain. Within decades, Muslim leaders began to unite and strike back. The Second Crusade, launched in 1147, ended in humiliation. Led by European kings, it faltered through poor planning and constant quarrels. The armies were defeated in Anatolia and Syria, their faith shaken, their purpose unclear. The dream of a lasting Christian East was fading. Then from the Muslim world arose a new leader, a man whose name would be remembered for centuries. Salah ad-Din, known to the West as Saladin, was both a warrior and a statesman. Calm-wise and deeply devout, he united Egypt and Syria, forging a single powerful realm. His goal was clear: to reclaim Jerusalem and cleanse the Holy Land from the invaders. In 1187, Saladin met the Crusader army near the Horns of Hattin. The sun burned mercilessly above as the Crusaders marched across the desert, desperate for water. Surrounded and exhausted, they fought valiantly but were overwhelmed. The true cross, the holiest relic carried into battle, was captured. Thousands were slain or taken prisoner. It was the greatest disaster the Crusaders had ever known, soon after Jerusalem surrendered. Yet unlike the bloody conquest of 1099, Saladin forbade massacre. He allowed Christians to leave peacefully and spared the city from ruin. His mercy stunned Europe, and his name became both feared and respected. When news reached the West, it ignited a storm. Kings and nobles once again vowed to reclaim the holy city. This became the Third Crusade, perhaps the most legendary of them all. Among its leaders was Richard the Lionheart, King of England, renowned for his courage and skill in battle. He joined forces with King Philip of France and Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, though their unity soon crumbled. Barbarossa drowned before reaching the Holy Land, and Philip returned home, leaving Richard to face Saladin alone. For 2 years, Richard led his forces through brutal campaigns along the coast. At the Battle of Arsuf, he won a stunning victory, his tactics and bravery unmatched. Yet even Richard could not retake Jerusalem. His men were exhausted and the holy city lay heavily defended. Realizing that continued war would destroy both sides, Richard sought peace. In 1192, he and Saladin agreed to a truce. Christian pilgrims could safely visit Jerusalem, though the city itself would remain under Muslim control. The two warriors, though enemies, came to respect one another, bound by honor, and the shared understanding of what it meant to lead men in war. The Crusades might have ended there, yet Europe was not ready to let go. Greed, ambition, and religious fervor pushed new waves of crusaders to sail east. But as the centuries turned, the purpose of these wars grew. Murky, the Fourth Crusade was meant to strike at Egypt and then move on to Jerusalem, but political scheming led the Crusaders to attack the Christian city of Constantinople instead. In 1204, the greatest city in the East, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, was consumed by fire and chaos. Churches were looted, relics stolen, and ancient libraries destroyed. The Crusaders crowned their own emperor and divided the spoils among themselves. What had begun as a holy mission had turned into an act of betrayal. From that moment, the Crusades lost their sanctity. The Byzantine Empire never recovered, and the divide between Eastern and Western Christendom became permanent. Later expeditions continued, but each one faltered. The Fifth Crusade reached Egypt but ended in failure. The Sixth achieved a brief diplomatic victory, restoring Christian access to Jerusalem without bloodshed, but it was short-lived. Then came the Seventh and Eighth Crusades, led by King Louis IX of France. He was a pious ruler determined to redeem the cause, but fate was cruel. In Egypt, his army was trapped and defeated. Louis himself was taken captive and ransomed back to his kingdom. Undeterred, he launched another crusade years later, landing in Tunis. There, disease swept through his camp, and the king fell ill and died under the desert sun. His death marked the fading of the crusading spirit. By the end of the 13th century, the remaining crusader strongholds along the coast of the Holy Land fell one by one. The final blow came in 1291, when Acre, the last great fortress of the Crusaders, was besieged and destroyed. The survivors fled to Cyprus, their dream of a Christian East gone forever. Centuries of struggle had achieved little lasting gain. The Crusades had drained Europe of wealth and blood. Millions had perished and countless towns had been burned. Yet their impact reached far beyond war. Through contact with the East Europeans encountered new ideas, goods, and technologies. Trade flourished between the Mediterranean and the Islamic world. Scholars translated Arabic works on science, medicine, and philosophy, planting the seeds of intellectual growth that would one day blossom into the Renaissance. Still, the scars of conflict remained. Distrust and hostility between Christians and Muslims deepened. The sack of Constantinople left bitterness that endured for centuries. The ideal of a united Christendom had collapsed under the weight of human greed and ambition. The Crusades were a mirror of their age, a reflection of both the light and darkness within humanity. They began with a cry of faith and ended in disillusionment. They showed how belief can inspire courage beyond measure, yet also blind men to mercy. In the glow of Pope Urban's words at Clermont, thousands had dreamed of eternal glory. In the ashes of Acre, they found only silence. But from their journey came lessons carved in history that power built on zeal alone cannot endure, that faith without wisdom becomes fire that consumes all. And so the Crusades stand as one of the great turning points of the medieval world. A saga of faith and fury, ambition and despair. A story that reminds us how even the holiest of causes can fall to human frailty.